Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a truly fascinating journey inward to explore the human mind. Think about your smartphone or your laptop for a second. Every so often, it prompts you for a software update, right? It needs to handle new apps, patch up bugs, and just run a lot more efficiently. Well, it turns out the human brain has its own dynamic, lifelong version of a software update, and we call it mental development. So today we're going to decode exactly how that architecture is built, how it upgrades itself, and how it manages to organize the absolute chaos of the world into usable intelligence.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll be covering 1. Defining mental development. 2. 7 areas of the mind. 3. Piaget and the schema. 4. Assimilation versus accommodation. And finally, 5. The final intellectual balance.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1. Defining mental development. We've got to start with our foundational definition. What is the actual core function of the mind's continuous development?
So, mental development, or cognitive development if you prefer the more formal term, is essentially the growth of our mental capacities. But the absolute key here is the why. It's really not just about getting smarter or memorizing random trivia. It's about adjusting to ever-changing environmental conditions. It is our mind's incredible way of expanding its capabilities so we can adapt and accomplish complex, difficult tasks. You know as well as I do that the world around us literally never stops changing, so our cognitive software simply cannot afford to remain static.
Moving right along to Section 2, 7 areas of the mind. If that's our overall goal, constant adaptation and adjustment, what are the specific features of this mental operating system?
These 7 areas actually form this incredible evolutionary ladder right inside our own heads. It starts way down at the foundational basic level with sensation and perception. This is just recognizing that something is hot, cold, loud, or bright. But as we grow, the whole system scales up. We move into concept formation, which is putting those raw sensations into neat little categories. Then we develop attention and interest, allowing us to actually focus. Next up is the development of imagination, followed super closely by language development so we can communicate those new concepts. Then, the development of memory to store all this massive data. And finally, we reach the absolute highest level, the development of problem-solving ability. It's a stacked progression. Sensation is the foundation for sure, but problem-solving, that's the penthouse.
That progression makes total sense, but it really begs a fundamental question. How does the mind actually build these abilities? I mean, how do we get from just sensing a bright light to solving complex mathematical equations or fixing a broken engine? Well, to figure that out, we need to meet the architect.
Which brings us to Section 3, Piaget and the schema. To answer how we build these abilities, we've got to meet the original developer of our most comprehensive understanding of mental architecture.
Now, while theories of mental development definitely feature great thinkers like Jerome Bruner, the most systematic, comprehensive framework we have was actually given to us by Jean Piaget. He was a Swiss biologist, and his approach is famously known as genetic epistemology, which is a mouthful, but it basically just means the study of how knowledge develops and grows. And because of his background in biology, Piaget didn't just see the mind as some mystical, floating cloud of thoughts. He saw it as a highly organic, structural system that develops through the organization and continuous reorganization of very specific patterns of behavior.
Now, what's really interesting about this quote is the massive paradigm shift Piaget is offering us. We so often think of intelligence as a static number, right? Like an IQ score, or just a measure of what facts you happen to know. But Piaget says, no way. Intelligence is an active, dynamic tool. It's the physical mechanism you use to organize your world and adapt to it. It is a verb, not a noun. And the primary thing intelligence is constantly organizing is something Piaget called schemas.
Schemas are the basic structural units of the human mind. Honestly, the easiest way to visualize this is to imagine your brain as a massive, expanding filing cabinet. Schemas are the individual file folders inside that cabinet. And get this, even from birth, we have these organized patterns of behavior. A tiny baby has a grasping schema or a sucking schema. But as we grow, our file folders become so much more complex. We develop a schema for what a dog is, a schema for how to politely order at a restaurant, or even a schema for how to pay attention to an explainer. Every single new experience you have has to be processed through this massive filing cabinet.
Let's move to Section 4, Assimilation versus Accommodation. Let's see exactly how we keep that mental filing cabinet updated when we encounter something entirely new. Our mind basically uses 2 very distinct processes to update its software. Let's start with assimilation.
Assimilation is when you have an existing mental file folder and you encounter a new experience that basically makes sense to you, so you just tweak that new experience a tiny bit to slide it right in. For example, a child knows what a golden retriever is. That's their schema for a dog. If they see a poodle for the first time, they assimilate it. It has 4 legs, it barks, boom, it fits perfectly into the dog folder. Or, for an adult, it's like learning a new software program that functions almost exactly like the old one you used. But what about accommodation? Well, accommodation is when you encounter new information that absolutely shatters your existing folder. You literally can't just slip the paper in, you have to build an entirely new folder or completely transform an old one. If that same child sees a horse for the first time, they might initially point and yell "big dog" because they're desperately trying to assimilate it. But when they realize horses are ridden, have hooves, and neigh, their dog folder no longer works. They must accommodate. They are forced to step up and create a brand new schema for horse. Accommodation is definitely harder, but it's where the most profound, life-changing learning actually happens.
And that brings us to Section 5, the final intellectual balance. What happens when this massive filing cabinet of schemas, operating through constant assimilation and accommodation, finally finds harmony?
The result is what Piaget called equilibration. It's the ongoing process of maintaining a balance between assimilation and accommodation. Really, it's the ultimate goal of the mind. When your operating system is in a state of equilibration, it means it's running incredibly smoothly. You aren't constantly overwhelmed by things you don't understand, which would require exhausting, nonstop accommodation, but you also aren't totally stagnant, just effortlessly assimilating everything and never actually growing. Equilibration is that optimal, sweet spot of intellectual functioning where learning feels natural, engaging, and highly effective.
Now, it's absolutely vital to know that building this beautifully balanced system doesn't just happen overnight. According to Piaget, cognitive development arises from physically and mentally interacting with the world over time. It passes through a series of 4 major, sequential stages from infancy all the way into adulthood: sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. You literally have to get out there, engage with your environment, face tough challenges, and let the dual processes of assimilation and accommodation do their heavy lifting over years and years to upgrade your mental capacity to that highest tier of problem solving.
And that incredible lifelong mechanism leaves us with a final thought to ponder. We all have deeply established mental files, our own schemas about how the world works, our careers, our relationships, and even ourselves. And very often we try to force every single new piece of information to just smoothly assimilate into what we already believe simply because it's easier. But true growth, real cognitive development, requires accommodation. So I leave you with this. What old schemas, what completely outdated file folders are you holding onto right now that need to be completely transformed and accommodated today? Thanks for joining this explainer. Keep updating your mental software and never stop learning.